6 mornings, 6 times the little girl had pulled on her worn leather boots before the sun cleared the ridge, tugged her father's hand toward the wagon, and asked the same question she had asked the morning before. 6 times Cole Alderman had looked down at his daughter's upturned face and found no good answer waiting behind his teeth. Daisy was 5 years old, with her mother's brown eyes and her father's stubbornness, and she had decided, without any consultation from the adults involved, that the woman coming on the train was going to be wonderful. She had decided this the same way she decided everything, completely, and without room for argument. Cole had sent the letter to the agency in Cheyenne 4 months prior. He was not a man who asked for things easily. The ranch outside of Bitter Creek, Wyoming, stretched across 200 acres of good grazing land, and he worked every inch of it with the kind of quiet ferocity a man develops when grief has burned away everything that is not essential. His wife, Clara, had been gone 2 years now, a fever, quick and merciless in the dead of January. He had held her hand, he had watched the lamp, he had done everything a man could do, and it had not been enough, and he did not speak of it afterward. What he spoke of, eventually, was Daisy. Daisy needed a woman's steadiness in the house. Daisy needed someone to braid her hair without pulling. Daisy needed meals that were not burned on the outside and raw in the middle, which was the honest truth of Cole's cooking. He was a fine cattleman and a poor cook, and a man who understood, after 2 winters alone, that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. So the letter went to Cheyenne. A reply came back signed by one Mabel Forsyth, age 28, formerly of Hays, Kansas, willing to travel, willing to work, asking only for honest employment and modest wages. The agency called it a marriage arrangement. Cole called it a business agreement. He had written back with terms. She had written back accepting them. The train was due 6 days ago. The station agent at Bitter Creek had tapped the schedule board with one bony finger and offered Cole the only explanation available to him, which was that the line east of Laramie had washed out in the spring rains, and there was no knowing exactly when things would resume. Cole had stood on that platform every morning since. Daisy had stood beside him. This was the 6th morning, and the sky above the tracks was the pale gray of an egg, and Daisy had her hand in his, and she was looking east with the patient certainty of someone who has never yet been truly disappointed by the world. Cole was looking east too, though his expression carried considerably more doubt. Then the whistle came, low and distant, rolling across the flat land like a stone skipped over water. Daisy's fingers tightened around his. She looked up at him. "Papa," she said, "she's here." He didn't answer, but he took 1 step forward, toward the tracks, and that was answer enough. The train came in with a great coughing release of steam, and the platform filled with dust and the smell of hot iron and coal smoke. Passengers began to descend the steps, most of them men, drummers, cattlemen, a minister in a black coat who nodded at Cole as he passed. Cole watched each face. He held the small photograph the agency had sent, creased now from handling, and he glanced at it once and then put it in his coat pocket, because he felt foolish holding it. He saw her before she reached the bottom step. She was not what he had expected, though he would have been pressed to say exactly what he had expected. She was tall for a woman, straight-backed, wearing a dark green traveling dress that had seen better days but was clean and well kept. She had dark hair pinned beneath a small hat with a single cloth flower on it, and she carried a carpet bag in one hand and a hat box in the other, and she was looking around the platform with the careful eyes of someone cataloging an unfamiliar situation, not frightened, measuring. Their eyes met. She crossed the distance between them with a brisk, practical stride, set the carpet bag down, and extended her hand. "Mr. Alderman," she said, "I apologize for the delay. The washout east of Laramie. The conductor said you'd been told. I hope the wait wasn't too great an inconvenience." Her voice was level and composed, and it had a slight roughness to it, as though she had been raised somewhere where the wind came through the walls. Cole shook her hand. Her grip was firm. "No inconvenience," he said, which was not strictly true, but was the only thing a man said in such circumstances. "Good." She looked down then, and found Daisy looking up at her with enormous, solemn eyes. Something shifted in Mabel Forsythe's expression. Not dramatically, she was clearly not a woman given to drama, but something behind her eyes softened, the way light softens when a cloud moves away from the sun. "And you must be Daisy," she said. She crouched down, right there on the platform, without concern for the dust on her hem. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. My name is Mabel." Daisy studied her for a long moment, with the pitiless honesty only small children can deploy. "You took a very long time," Daisy said. Mabel nodded, gravely. "I did. The train had trouble with the rain. I'm sorry I made you wait." "Papa waited too," Daisy said. "He came every single morning." A silence landed between the two adults, brief and weighted. Cole felt the heat move up the back of his neck. "That was very patient of him," Mabel said, still looking at Daisy. Then she stood, picked up her carpet bag, and looked at Cole with the same measured steadiness she'd shown from the first step. "I'm ready to see the ranch, Mr. Alderman, whenever you are." He nodded, took the carpet bag from her before she could object, and led them both to the wagon. Daisy walked between them, holding one hand from each side, a fact that Cole was certain she had engineered entirely on purpose. The drive back to the ranch took the better part of an hour, over road that was more suggestion than fact in the spring mud. Cole drove, Mabel sat beside him on the bench, Daisy sat between them again, and fell asleep against Mabel's arm somewhere around the second mile, which seemed to Cole to be the most trusting thing his daughter had done since Clara died. He didn't say that. He kept his eyes on the horses and his thoughts to himself, which was his customary arrangement. Mabel, for her part, looked out at the land. The grass was coming back after the rains, a thin pale green over the brown. The mountains sat blue and enormous in the west, unhurried, permanent. She watched them the way a person watches something they've been trying to picture in their mind and are now comparing against the real thing. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said at last. Not to him, exactly. More to the sky. "It usually is," Cole said. She glanced at him. He kept his eyes on the road. When they reached the ranch, he helped her down from the wagon and carried her bags to the door. The house was a solid, two-room log structure with a covered porch, a separate sleeping loft added on after Daisy was born. He had swept it that morning. He was aware, walking through the door with her behind him, of every inadequacy the place possessed. The uneven floorboards, the window that didn't quite close on the left, the kitchen table with the leg he'd been meaning to replace for months. Mabel walked through the main room, set her hat on the table, and looked around slowly. He stood in the doorway and braced himself for whatever came next. "The stove works well?" she asked. "Well enough," he said. "Drafty and hard wind." She nodded. She crossed to the kitchen end and examined the stove with the attention of someone who has known many stoves and has opinions about them. She checked the flue. She opened the firebox. She straightened up. "I'll need more wood smoke clay for the gaps," she said, "and a second shelf above the dry goods, if that's possible. I can't cook properly with everything stacked on the floor." "I'll build the shelf," he said. "Good." She turned and looked at him directly. "Mr. Alderman, the agency's letter described this as a marriage of convenience. I accepted that arrangement in good faith, and I intend to honor it, but I want us to be plain with each other about what that means." He waited. "I'll keep this house and cook your meals and see to Daisy. I'll be a proper companion in all the ways this arrangement requires, but I won't be managed, and I won't be dismissed. If I have an opinion about the running of this household, I'll say it. You can disagree, but I won't be silent to make things easier." Cole looked at her for a long moment. Outside, a meadowlark called from somewhere near the fence line, bright and unhurried. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. She picked up her carpet bag and asked where she would sleep. He showed her the loft. Daisy appeared in the doorway of the main room, rubbing her eyes, and announced that Mabel should sleep next to her because it was warmer. Cole told Daisy that was enough. Mabel told Daisy she would think about it. After supper, a stew that Mabel assembled from the provisions in the cellar with a speed and sureness that made Cole quietly embarrassed by every meal he had attempted in the past 2 years. Daisy fell asleep in her chair at the table. Mabel lifted her and carried her to her small bed without being asked. Cole watched from the doorway. He didn't say anything. There was nothing that needed saying just then. He stayed up an hour after the lamp was put out, sitting on the porch steps in the cool spring dark, listening to the horses settle in the barn and the last of the wind move through the cottonwoods along the creek. He had expected the arrangement to feel stranger than it did. He had expected something more like discomfort. What he felt instead was something harder to name, a cautious easing, the way a joint stops aching when the weather finally turns. He did not examine it too closely. He was not a man who made a habit of examining things that seemed to be working. Inside, he could see the glow of the banked stove through the window, proof of occupation, proof of warmth. He went to bed. The first week established the shape of things. Mabel was up before Cole, which he had not anticipated, and which quietly rearranged his understanding of her. She had coffee on the stove and the kitchen swept before he had his boots laced, and by the time he came in from the morning feeding, there was breakfast on the table, real breakfast, not the cold biscuits and jerked beef he'd been living on, eggs from the hens, cornbread, sometimes salt pork when she found it in the cellar wrapped in cloth. She did not make a ceremony of it. She set the food down and sat across from him and ate with the same composed efficiency she brought to everything. And they talked about practical things, the fence on the north pasture that wanted mending, the state of the flour barrel, whether the creek behind the property was likely to rise again. She had questions. She asked them plainly. He answered plainly. Daisy talked continuously about subjects unrelated to any of these concerns, and both adults listened to her with the same patient attention, which Cole noticed and did not remark upon. At the end of that first week, he came home from the north pasture to find a second chair on the porch. He had only the one, a solid rocker he'd built for Clara, that he still sat in every evening. The new chair was simpler, a straight-backed thing made from pine, but it had been sanded smooth and the joints were tight. He stood and looked at it. Mabel appeared in the doorway with a dish towel over her shoulder. "There's wood enough in the barn," she said. "I used what was already cut. If it's not straight, I can take it apart and try again." He looked at the chair a moment longer. "It's straight," he said. "Good," she said, and went back inside. He sat in his rocker that evening. The new chair sat beside him, empty. He thought about saying something about it the next morning, some acknowledgement. He didn't, in the end, but he moved his rocker 6 inches to the left to give the new chair room. 3 days later, Daisy dragged Mabel out to the porch after supper and pushed her into the new chair with the authority of a person conducting proceedings, and Daisy herself climbed into Cole's lap and announced that this was how it should be done from now on. Cole put his arm around her. Mabel, across from them, looked out at the mountains in the last of the light and said nothing, but there was something in her face that Cole couldn't quite read, a careful wondering, the way a person looks at something they wanted a long time ago and were not sure they were allowed to want. He looked away before she could catch him looking. It was around the 3rd week that the trouble announced itself, as trouble in that country usually did, quietly, through a proxy. Orrin Haas rode in on a Tuesday morning while Cole was in the south field. He rode right up to the house, which was not a neighborly thing to do, and he sat his horse in the yard and waited for someone to come out. He was foreman for the Consolidated Range Cattle Company, which had been buying up grazing rights across 3 counties for the past 18 months. He wore a town hat and carried himself with the particular assurance of a man whose employer has a great deal of money. Mabel came to the porch. "Ma'am," Haas said, touching his hat, "is Mr. Alderman about?" "He's in the field," Mabel said. "You're welcome to ride out and find him, or you can leave a message." "I'll wait," Haas said, and dismounted without being invited. Mabel studied him for a moment. Then she stepped off the porch and stood between him and the front door, with the dish towel still in her hands, and said, "There's a fence post at the property line. Mr. Alderman put it there himself. Your horse is on the inside of it." A long pause settled between them. "I don't think your man would want to be rude to a neighbor," Haas said. "I think my husband would want his yard respected," Mabel said. The word husband came out as level as everything else she said, without any catch or hesitation. "I'll tell him you stopped. Your name." He told her. He remounted. He rode to the fence line and stopped there and waited, and his horse stamped and blew dust in the heat, and he watched the house with a calculation in his eyes that Mabel noted and stored away. When Cole came in at noon, she told him the visit exactly as it had happened, without editorializing. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What did he look like?" Cole said. "Careful," Mabel said. "Like a man who's used to getting things by being patient about it." Cole nodded. He ate. He thought. "Consolidated has been after the Hennessy parcel to the east," he said. "If they get that and the marsh water rights, they'll have me boxed." "Then we need to make sure they don't get the water rights," Mabel said, as calmly as if she were discussing the flower situation. He looked up at her. "I grew up near Hayes," she said. "I've seen how this goes. The company sends the careful man first. Then they send a letter with numbers in it. Then the numbers get smaller every time until you're arguing about your own land on their terms. You need to file a formal water claim before they do." "I filed the original claim 2 years ago," Cole said. "Then you need to refile it and make certain the county recorder has it in the right ledger," she said. "Sometimes these things get lost." He put his fork down. He looked at her steadily, with a new and genuine attention, the kind that is not altogether comfortable to receive. "You know a fair amount about land rights," he said. "My father lost his farm in Kansas when I was 16, she said. "I paid attention." She got up and brought the coffee pot back to the table and poured for him. No further explanation offered. None requested. The following Monday, Cole rode into Bitter Creek, found the county recorder's office, and spent 2 hours with the ledgers. He found the claim. It was in the right place, but only barely, filed under the wrong subsection, easy to overlook or to argue over. He had it corrected and certified and came home with the paper in his breast pocket. When he walked in, Mabel was teaching Daisy her letters at the kitchen table with a piece of chalk and the back of an old seed catalog. Daisy was pronouncing the letter M in 12 different ways, apparently trying to find the one that sounded like its name. Mabel was correcting her without impatience, which Cole had decided was one of Mabel's most remarkable qualities. She seemed to have a very large reserve of patience that she spent selectively, not recklessly. He set the certified paper on the table. "It's done," he said. Mabel looked at it. She looked at him. "Good," she said. And then, without ceremony, "D. Daisy, show Mr. Alderman your D." Daisy held up the seed catalog and showed him a D that was approximately the right shape, drawn with the grave concentration of an artist. "That's a fine D," Cole said. He sat down at the table without being asked, and Mabel slid the chalk toward him, and for the next quarter hour he sat with his daughter and his wife, and the word still sat strangely, but less strangely than it had 10 days before, and they went through the alphabet together, all 3 of them, at a kitchen table in Wyoming, with the spring wind moving through the one window that didn't shut all the way. Haas came back on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after his first visit, and this time he came with a letter. Cole read it on the porch. Mabel stood beside him. The letter was from Consolidated Ranges Legal Counsel, and it explained, in language that was very polite and very precise, that the company believed there was an ambiguity in Cole's original water rights filing, and that they were prepared to discuss an equitable resolution, meaning they were prepared to offer him money to stop fighting them before the fight had properly started. Cole folded the letter. "They're early," Mabel said quietly. "Or they found out about the recertification," Cole said. He looked at Haas, who had stayed at the fence line this time, which Cole noticed. "Tell your employers," he said, loud enough to carry, "that there is no ambiguity. The claim is certified and recorded. If they want to dispute it, they can do that through the county court, and I will be glad to meet them there." Haas considered this. He looked at Mabel. He looked back at Cole. "Mr. Alderman," he said, "the company is willing to be generous. This doesn't have to be a difficulty for your family." Cole stepped off the porch. He walked to the fence line at a measured pace, and he stood on his side of it with his hands in his pockets, and he looked at Haas the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved in his head. "It's not a difficulty," Cole said. "I have a certified water claim, a good title, and 200 acres that I intend to work until I'm too old to sit a horse. The answer is no. You're welcome to tell them I said so, with whatever language seems useful." A silence settled. Somewhere in the cottonwoods down by the creek, a bird called out, clear and unhurried, cutting through the afternoon heat. Haas studied Cole for a long moment. Then he looked past Cole at Mabel on the porch, and something in his assessment shifted. Whatever he had expected to find here, a struggling widower maybe, a man worn down by grief and poor seasons, he had found something else instead, a household that was standing, and standing steady. "I'll pass along your answer," Haas said. He touched his hat to Mabel and turned his horse and rode back the way he'd come. Cole stood at the fence line until the dust settled. Then he turned and walked back to the porch. Mabel was watching the road with her arms folded, her expression composed and level, but he noticed that she exhaled slowly when the rider was gone. Not fear, release. "He won't be back," Cole said. "Not soon," Mabel agreed, "but they may write again." "Let them write," he said. "I'll answer every letter." She looked at him then, and something in her face changed in the same way it had that first evening when she'd watched the mountains. That careful wondering, opened slightly further now, like a door left an inch ajar to let the warmth through. He didn't look away this time. He held her gaze steadily, the way he held the fence line. After a moment she looked back at the road, and he looked at the road too, and they stood together on the porch of his ranch, and the word was beginning to feel like it needed to be longer, like it ought to include more than just him, and said nothing more, which was its own kind of saying. That night, after Daisy was asleep, Mabel came and sat in the chair on the porch. Cole was already in his rocker. The sky above the mountains had gone dark blue, shot through with the last amber of the day along the western ridge, and the first stars were showing. They sat in a comfortable silence for a while, which was new. In the first weeks, the silence between them had been polite but careful, each of them giving the other room. This silence was different. It had weight and warmth, the way a quilt has weight, not pressing but present. "Can I ask you something?" Mabel said. "You generally do," Cole said, which was the nearest he got to dry humor. She looked at him with a faint expression that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. "Why the agency?" she said. "Why not someone local? There are women in Bitter Creek." He thought about the question. He was quiet for long enough that a man of different temperament might have felt uncomfortable, but Mabel had learned to read his silences as thinking rather than dismissal. "Local is complicated," he said at last. "People who knew Clara, they look at Daisy and they see her mother. I needed someone who could look at Daisy and see Daisy." The words had come out plainer than he intended. He felt exposed by them in a way that was not entirely unpleasant, but was new. Mabel was quiet for a moment. "When I look at Daisy," she said, "I see Daisy." He nodded. He looked out at the dark pasture. "I know that," he said, quietly. "I noticed it the first day." Another silence, this one gentler. The horses moved in the barn, settling. The cottonwoods rustled down by the creek. "I want to tell you something," Mabel said. Her voice was still level, but beneath its steadiness, there was something that had not been there before. A careful honesty, the kind that cost something. "The agency matched me with 2 men before you. Both good men, I think. I turned them down." Cole waited. The first one didn't mention he had children until the second letter. He was ashamed of it, I think. Thought it would put me off. She paused. "You put Daisy in the first sentence." He turned and looked at her. "The child eats first," she said, quoting his letter back to him. The line he'd written because he wanted to be absolutely clear about the order of things, and because he was not a man who knew how to be indirect about what mattered. "That's what you wrote, word for word. The child eats first." And I thought, this is a man worth trusting. Cole was quiet for a long time. Then, "She does," he said. "She always has." "I know," Mabel said. "I've seen it every morning." He stood. He did not do it dramatically or with ceremony. He stood the way he did everything, directly, without flourish, and he held out his hand. She looked at it. She looked at him. She stood. She took his hand. "I think," Cole said, slowly, as though finding the words by feel in the dark, "that this arrangement has become something other than an arrangement." "I think so too," Mabel said. "I don't know exactly how to do that part," he said. "The other part, neither do I," she said. "But I expect we'll manage." He didn't kiss her then. It was not that kind of moment. He held her hand in the dark, and they stood on the porch he'd built with his own hands, looking out at the land he'd worked and meant to keep, and the stars came out over the mountains one by one, unhurried, as though there were no shortage of light in the world, only a matter of patience. He said her name, just once. "Mabel." "Yes," she said, and that was enough. By the time June brought its long golden evenings to the ranch, the house had taken on a different quality. Not louder. Cole was still a quiet man, and the ranch was a quiet place, but fuller, the way a room feels fuller when a window is opened and the air comes through. Daisy had taken to calling Mabel Mama sometime in the middle of May, not as an announcement or a question, but simply as a fact, the way she stated all facts. Mabel had gone very still the first time it happened. Cole had watched her from the doorway of the barn. She had crouched down and looked at Daisy with great seriousness and said, "If that's what you'd like to call me, I'm very glad." Daisy had accepted this as confirmation of what she already knew and gone back to feeding the chickens. Mabel had stood up and wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the far side of the garden and stood with her back to the house for a short while. When she came back, her eyes were dry and her expression was composed, but there was a brightness to her that had not been there before. Cole had gone back to the barn without saying anything, which was how he showed respect for things that mattered. The shelf above the dry goods had been built in the second week. It was a good shelf, level and sanded, with a small lip so the jars wouldn't walk off in a wind. Mabel had put her small collection of things on it, a tin of dried herbs, a blue glass bottle that had belonged to her mother, a small book of recipes written in someone else's hand. The shelf made the kitchen look inhabited rather than merely occupied. One evening in early June, Cole came in from the last of the day's work and found a ribbon tied around the handle of his coffee mug. It was a simple length of blue cloth, the same shade as the glass bottle on the shelf. He looked at it for a moment. "Daisy thought you needed something bright in the mornings," Mabel said from the stove, her back to him. "I thought she was right." He picked up the mug. He drank his coffee. He left the ribbon where it was, and it stayed there every morning after, a small signal, a flag of occupation. a proof that the house was no longer a place where he merely endured the hours, but one where someone had thought to tie a blue ribbon on his mug because the morning deserved something bright. It was not a grand thing. Frontier life is not built on grand things. It is built on the second chair on the porch, and the shelf above the dry goods, and the ribbon, and the coffee that is always hot when you come in from the cold. It is built on the child that eats first, and the man who says so in the first sentence, and the woman who reads that sentence and thinks, "This is a man worth trusting." There is a mercy in the ordinary things if you know how to look for it. You can spend a very long time looking for the extraordinary and walk right past the warm stove and the hand offered in the dark. The people in this story knew that. They learned it slowly, the way most true things are learned, through the doing of it, day by day, season by season, until one morning you wake up and the life you were only trying to survive has become a life you are grateful for. Cole Alderman worked his land and kept his water rights and drove his cattle to market in the fall, and came home every evening to a lit window and a child who met him at the fence, and a woman who had chosen to stay, not because the contract said so, but because she had come to love the man who put his daughter first. Mabel Forsyth, who became Mabel Alderman, built herself a home in Wyoming the same way she built the chair, one steady joint at a time, no piece she was not sure of, nothing put in place that could not bear weight. And Daisy grew up knowing that she was loved, which is the only thing a child truly needs to know, and the rest of it follows from there. Now, if this story found you tonight and put something warm in your chest, the way a story about a ribbon on a coffee mug, and a woman who stands between the door, and a man who hasn't been invited, and a little girl who holds a hand from each side, if any of that sat right with you, I'd be glad to hear it. Tell me in the comments, what was the moment that got you? Was it the chair on the porch, the letter with the first sentence, or the morning Daisy said a word that changed everything? I read every one, and they mean more than you know. If you'd like more stories of the Old West, of quiet people who built extraordinary lives out of ordinary courage, subscribe and come back. There are more stories where this one came from, and I'll be here to tell them. Good night. God bless you. Safe travels wherever you're headed.